So probably when you talk about history in this tone, it could be a revenge history from our school days, or it could be a redemption, or it could be somewhat explaining an antidote to history is a distillation of rumors. Many people told us, very famous people told us that history is a distillation of rumors because history was very storytelling. History was essentially to tell us what happened at which date, but not connecting to the entire map of geopolitics or to the entire map of bilateral trade in waterways in those times. So when you say about these things, it actually opens up our mind because currently the government is talking about look east policy, currently the government is talking about BIMSTEC. Now BIMSTEC is essentially Bay of Bengal initiative for a multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. Now why I'm putting such dreary stuff into such interesting history discussion is because I found quite contemporariness in the way you describe history. So when you say that Nalanda University was supported by the King of Sumatra, it's essentially an endowment for education in a different country, a support for education in a different country to a leading university, which is not new, which is not what is happening to, or in the 70s what happened to our universities when we got American aid. So it is essentially telling us about a pattern, about a trend which has happened. And when you are mentioning about Kaundi, the love story, you also, I think you forgot to mention that Kaundi was a very handsome man. Right? He was very handsome man, so almost irresistible for Soma. But why I'm trying to tell you all this is because a few takeaways which happened after hearing you today is that one, the importance of temple endowment as a venture capital or as a fund to support our maritime industry and trade. And that's essentially why temple as a structure was so important for all of us, and particularly in East India and particularly Odisha. Another aspect that you quite clearly mentioned is the importance of other areas or history of the rest of India barring Northwest or Delhi. You mentioned Delhi, I'm adding Northwest. So whichever trend you talk about in India, we eventually fall back to Delhi or Northwest. But we know how mighty were Cholas, we know how mighty were Vijayanagara Empire, we know that Hampi was one of the biggest, largest cities of the world then. The largest city of the world then. So we essentially understand that in this course of history, we learn that our people with the help of bilateral, multilateral exchange of expertise, technology, had built such infrastructure in this country. And that's the learning for us. And why I'm again and again talking about this learning is because we want your history to fit into today's story, today's life. And that's where we would see the relevance for this generation to get into history, love history, imbibe history. Now when we imbibe history, we should not be only relegated or limited or confined to a few rabble-rousing aspects of history, which was yours, which is mine, and then we start a fight. That is not the intention. The intention is to make history a learning. Third aspect, very important aspect, what you mentioned is the romance with history. Why I'm saying romance is, when you go to Hathigumpa and you stand there and look at Dholi and you say that this could be the case, that's exactly the experiential history that we're talking about. I would like to stress the next half a minute on this, experiential history. Many people would come, many people would read a few books, many people would debunk theories, many people would say that this is my theory, my concoction. Now, being a historian, which is, I think, almost like being a scientist, you can either experiment, do action research and get back to a theory or debunk or support a theory, or you don't. These days, with the democratization of information and data, there's no dearth of people who would be interested to do studies on historical aspects. But the historian or the author going to the field, having that experience oneself, would actually, you can call it intuitive, you can call it anecdotal, you can call it romantic, you can call it anything. But The experience is what I'm talking to you about. One has to have that immersion in history to talk about history or write about history. Because the days of theoretically talking about history or theorizing history based on a terrain, based on animals, based on how we walked, how we dressed up, are more or less phasing out. Here is the time when we need to go there, find it for ourselves, and then probably, because history can't go without imagining or without conjuring of things, so you can conjure up things. Last but not the least is, what do we do next? Now we know that there was a bilateral trade or multilateral trade. So now we are talking about Bhutan to Sri Lanka or Bhutan to the island countries. The island countries are doing pretty well. Now we had the entire naval or maritime infrastructure there. We still, in places like Orissa, we still celebrate our faring to these places. What do we do next? Do we keep ourselves confined to celebrations once a year? Do we need to have more students, more scholars come into this field? Do we have the kind of research, scholarship, research support available for people to do this kind of a study? Is this a meaty enough study to give us enough insights? Do we need these insights? So if I were to answer these my own questions, I would say that this is the time when we need to go back to factual, near factual history, which is essentially imagination backed by experience, backed by a good amount of study, not only by Western historians but also by Indian historians. We have some good amount of study on that. What is ailing now for a place like Orissa, because we are talking about Orissa, I feel very proud and very honored because today in the central part of the capital of the country we are talking about Orissa history, which has not happened many times. Which has not happened many times when we talk about Kharwala or Ashoka, whoever was great. In fact, that reminded me when you mentioned that Ashoka is not great, Christopher Hitchens saying God is not making it. So anyway, so that's not a perfect analogy, but what is ailing now is that we don't know how to protect our monuments. We don't know how to protect our relics. What do we do about that? Do we ask for more endowment? Do we raise the profile of history to a level where the country feels it necessary, where the government or the corporates or all of us feel it necessary not to go there and take a few pictures and selfies, but actually put ourselves onto the job of protecting the relics or writing about them or doing something which actually means that we are involved. The civil society so far, I'm being very blunt and candid, so far has not been involved with history. And particularly for Orissa, I've worked in almost all the monuments of Orissa, not at your depth, but from a civil society perspective, where we've been trying to protect, So, ASI is not an answer to the protection. What I'm talking to you about is getting into our lives, getting the monument into our lives and ourselves getting into the monuments. That does not happen. So I'd like to hear more about that sometime later. Last, genetics, archaeology, climate change and gender. These are the four areas where we need to. Climate change is so important for Orissa. Orissa is not going through a climate change, it is sitting under climate emergency. Every year there is something or the other that's going to hit us. It will again, God forbid, hit us next year. These are the predictions. So how do we do that? What has been the role of women in all these trade, besides sending off their men folk? What is the other support they provided? And what is the archaeology? Maritime archaeology in India doesn't exist. Marine archaeology in India doesn't exist. Let's be very frank about it. So what do we do about it? Last, genetics. So much now we have progressed on genetics. How do we take this up and how do we document them and disseminate them among the students and civil society? Mostly civil. When it comes to history, we always say students. I don't know why. Because all of us are involved. So it's not only students, all of us. Our Odissi dancers come from a culture. I'll not say a deep history, but a culture. Whether it was Devdasi or after that or before that, it's a culture. So everywhere, if you say, particularly for Orissa, I'm again saying because that's the context, our complete life system has come from our culture, which has come from our history. So we would love to do more of history, talk more of history, and see how we can find a fit. Thank you so much.